Hi, my name's Jeff Goodwin. I'm a friend of Susan May. Susan was a family friend, best friend of my sister from way, way back. And this is a presentation regarding the evidence in her case where she was convicted of murdering her elderly aunt in May 1993. I'm hoping that this will be helpful for the CCRC who are reviewing this case, and just for everybody else who might want to just get up to speed with where we are in the case at the moment. Just to say, if you didn't know, that Susan passed away last October, but we continue the fight, and the family continue the fight until her name is cleared and the conviction declared unsafe. I'm making this presentation today in 4 parts. First part is looking at the documents that Susan prepared a couple of years ago, January 2012, for the CCRC for a new application for them to look at her case. They'd originally put it, prior to that, they'd put it down. We'll look at some evidence that's come to light since then, and then an examination of the actual main, what was said to be the main plank in the prosecution's case against her, the 3 marks on the wall. One of those you can see next to me there. And then finally, just an overview of lots of evidence that's come in, various reports from various people, all supportive of Susan's case. So here we go with the application, which was this document that we took down to the CCRC in January 2012. And I'll read this first section here. We seek to bring new evidence and argument and items of non-disclosure to support our case. 1. Using photos of the wall and marks before enhancement, we shall show that a grave and deliberate misrepresentation took place. I believe our main ground of appeal should be regarding a young man who was said to be a good suspect but was never referred to at trial. The second ground of appeal should relate to what was said to be the second main plank of the prosecution's case, related to some scratches that were said to be on the deceased lady's face, on Susan's auntie's face. Our third ground of appeal should be some the non-disclosure of some fibres that were found on the hand of Auntie Hilda. And those fibres were never identified to Susan's clothes or her aunt's clothes, so whose were they? And the fourth ground relates to the alleged blood, and has it been proven to be blood? Well, we'll be saying that no, it hasn't. There were no other suspects referred to at trial. Susan was the only person in the frame for the jury to consider. But there had been a young man. There had been a number of young men, burglars and some with violent backgrounds, interviewed by the police, and one who had been pronounced to be a good suspect. I'm not going to mention his name because Susan would never want his name to be mentioned. We don't want to make somebody a murderer who's not had a trial. But in my opinion, there's enough evidence. If I'd have been in a jury for this man to have a trial, I would have found him guilty. He was brought to the attention of the police by an anonymous phone call from what the police believe to be a member of his family, and also another young lady who knew him. And following the murder, he'd been round to her house to say he'd really done it this time, and she took that to, in conversation with the family, of course, took that to be that he was saying he'd done the murder. Since then, that young man has been murdered himself, and the person who murdered him has come forward to Susan's solicitor to testify that he had heard that he had said that he had an involvement in the death of the lady in Sandal Road in Royton. At the time, if you were in the newspapers and things like that, there was a big appeal for a red car that was seen at the scene on the night of the murder. It was seen by 2 people. It was seen by a man down the road, and that man down the road said it was a Ford Fiesta with a V or W reg registration, a red car, and that it had 3 occupants, and that it had, as it drove away, he was suspicious of it because it was going slow and it was late at night. As it drove away, as he watched it, he saw that the rear bumper was sloping. The next door neighbour of Susan's aunt, where the murder took place in her house, was brought to the attention of some noises in the street, and he went to his window and he saw a red car that he thought was a Ford Fiesta parked outside the house. Its engine was still running, the lights were turned off, and there was no one in it. It was there for about 15 minutes, and then it went on its way. Up to the time of the last appeal, we had been told that car was never found. So this is new evidence for an appeal. That car actually, or a car fitting exactly that description, a V or a W registration, a Ford Fiesta red, with a sloping bumper, had been found. It had belonged to the sister of the man who we say is the good suspect, and he was known to use that car. He was known to borrow that car. It had taken the police a considerable amount of time to find it, because she had sold it within 3 days of the murder. When the police did find the car, they took forensic exhibits from it, so that they could take them back to the lab and see if there was maybe the fibres were in there. But those fibres never got to the lab. Someone decided they shouldn't go to the lab, and the file relating to this thing was filed away in the wrong file. That's why it wasn't available for us to know about. So it wasn't known about by anybody. I should say that the samples have since been examined, and there was nothing in the car that related, but there might have been. But that has come to light since the last appeal, so that is new evidence. It's new evidence, substantial evidence in its own right, and it's also what's called non-disclosure, so that speaks very badly for the police not to have made that available to the defence. I kind of apologise at the start of this for showing you a gruesome picture. This gruesome picture is a photo of the dead lady, so I apologise for showing you this. The observation that I simply make is that a police person alleged that Susan had made a statement regarding having seen scratches on her aunt's face, and she said that Susan would only know about these scratches if she'd been the murderer. That was the evidence that was brought to trial. You can see, if you look at the face, there are no scratches. There are no scratches on that face. When Hilda was in the mortuary being identified by Susan's sister, Anne, this is what Anne said about her aunt as she looked at her. She looked peaceful, and there was no visible signs of facial injury, other than a bright purple appearance of the facial skin. I could see no evidence of breaks in the skin. This evidence was brought by Sergeant Janet Rimmer, and it ought to have been recorded on the computer at the time, and it wasn't. And she said she wrote it in her notebook. But since then, we've asked for all the time we've been asking for that notebook to be revealed, but we've never. That notebook has never been given to us. Susan has always been very adamant that she never made the statement relating to these scratches. I believe that it's a manufactured piece of evidence against her. Our third item that we brought to the CCRC relates to some fibres that were found on the hand of the dead lady on the day when the investigation took place. And at that time, they were said to be fibres. These fibres were not brought to trial; they were overlooked by Susan's defence team. And basically, when they were first seen, they were said to be fibres. And then when they were recorded, they were said to be 1 grey hair and 3 colourless fibres and 1 red fibre. Then later on in the list by the forensic man, he said that they were hers from the left hand of the deceased. When in a trial you make a witness statement, so the forensic man, when he made the witness statement, forgot to mention the fibres. You just call them hers, and then if you just call them hers from the deceased, you think they're from the lady, and you don't look at it any further, and so that they'll not take cursor. But if there's so prominent, so major a piece of evidence that you would want to know where they came from, and they didn't come from Susan's clothes, and they didn't come from her auntie's clothes. Where did they come from? Only from someone else who actually did the murder. For us in the campaign for Susan, we've always been frustrated that there was no. It was said there was no photographs taken of the stains on the wall, the 3 stains on the wall. There was no photographs taken of them on the day, and there was no sort of full wall photograph. You would want, if these stains were being taken seriously at the beginning of the crime scene, which it said that they were, you would expect the photographer to be told to take a photograph of the wall and then to go into each of these stains and take a photograph of those. So we know what it's like from the beginning of the time, and we've always been told that there was no such photographs, and we never had copies of those photographs if they did exist. And then when Susan's solicitor retired a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago, we went to his office and brought a whole carload of the paperwork there, which I took to Susan's house. And within a week, Susan was up here saying that I found these photographs. And there was 2 significant photographs because what happened at trial was, because they didn't take the photographs, they speculated. They just had to say, "Oh no, it's okay," So we didn't have a definitive. What did it really look like? So I don't know if you can see that. And it's not taken. These photographs weren't taken by the fingerprint people, who they should have been taken by. They were simply taken by the senior crime man on the day that he arrived. And so he just went around with his own initiative and took some photographs, and he saw these things and he took them. He didn't. There's 3 stains said, but even he didn't take a photograph of the 3rd stain. Only the first 2 stains were taken before they were enhanced. But this first photograph, if you can see it, you can see that that's the wall that the stains are going to be said to be on, and you can see it's dirty. It's seriously dirty down that wall. It's not a clean wall. It's a wall that's got lots of marks on it. You can see it from this photograph. This was the photograph produced that came out of this material that we'd never seen before. Maybe we should have, and certainly we should have, because it was in the hands of Susan's solicitors, but we'd never seen it before. So these are the two stains. This is the stain that's got Susan's fingerprint in it, and this is a stain that's got the second hand. There's a handprint there. These handprints were enhanced by 2 different chemicals. Iodine was applied to them and made them stand out a little bit, and then ninhydrin was also applied to them so that you could see them better. But you can see that how faint they are. When we took these photographs to the QC that did Susan's last appeal, Michael Mansfield, he was shocked to see them. And he actually said that if he had seen these photographs, he would have conducted the appeal in a completely different way. So the absence of us having these photographs on the table has been really detrimental to Susan's case over all these years. And last to say, these are the photographs that were actually presented in court for the people to try and get an idea of what was being said. So this was the wall after it had been enhanced by various chemicals. You can see all the, you can see it's dirty, and that's the back, the backdrop of it. And then these are the photographs. That kind of photograph is what the jury was shown to demonstrate, what the stains had looked like. The judge at the time said there must have been a lot of material to make those stains on the hands, and he also said that from these photographs, if you would members of the jury, if you and I had seen them, we would have said, oh, there's a bloody handprint on the wall. Now, for him to end up with that opinion from a stain that starts off like that means that there's been a serious misrepresentation of those stains to the jury. So we present that at this time. We've been advised all down the line not to complain about the police or the prosecution or this and that. Nobody's got to be complained against. We haven't got. But we have to complain about a couple of witnesses because they appeared at the last appeal and were said by the judge at the last appeal that they were impressive witnesses. That was the senior investigating officer, Superintendent Kerr, and a forensic young lady called Joanne Ashworth. Susan made some complaints to the Police Complaints Authority, and so Superintendent Kerr was interviewed by them in 1999. And when he's talking about GH1 and GH2, that's the two stains that are handprints. The first two stains that are handprints on the wall. They're called GH1 and GH2. They're referred to as that. He says this. It is also fair to say that when the blood was subsequently examined by Professor Brinkmann in Germany, that he proved the probability was that the blood was Hilda Marchbank's without any shadow of a doubt. I mean, it was Hilda Marchbank's blood. So the actual fingerprint in blood on the wall was in Hilda Marchbank's blood. That's Superintendent Kerr's strongly stated evidence. You would not doubt a man speaking that authoritatively about something, would you? This is a page from Professor Brinkmann's report, and I'll put it up to you. So this is what Professor Brinkmann, when he's asked to test the stains, says. You can see left hand GH1. So he's going to test GH1 with a basic, is it blood? It's not even got to the DNA stage yet. He's going to do DNA on stuff, but he's not even got to the DNA. Basically, got it out of the packet, said, is it blood? If it's not blood, throw it in the bin. What's it to do with anything? So GH1, and if you look over here, you test it twice, and it's negative for blood. You cannot find it to be blood of any kind. It's not blood, because it doesn't respond to the Castlemere test that he gives it. So he does it with a Castlemere test, and it's negative for blood. Test it twice. And he doesn't progress that onto doing any DNA samples, because it's not blood. GH2 is the paint flakes of the second handprint, GH2. And again, he tests that twice, and that's negative as well. So the two main stains, the first two times you test them, are negative for blood. But in the package for GH2, there's a second package which is unlabelled. Now that it is unlabelled means that it should not be used. It's not authority. There's no authority to it if it hasn't got a label on it. So we don't know where it came from. And it's unused. And he tests that for Castlemere and it's positive. But we don't know where it came from. So we really shouldn't put any strength to that testimony there. The very strong statement that Superintendent Kerr had been making, that these stains were definitely in Hilda Marchbank's blood. He's, the handprint with the fingerprint is what he said, and it's not the case. I wrote to Professor Brinkman myself at the time, and this is, I asked him some questions, and these are the answers to the questions that he gave me. By this, it is self-evident that no statement can be made as to whether GH1 was blood or whose blood it was. And we've got Superintendent Kerr saying it is blood, and it is Hilda's blood. There's no possibility to test whether GH1 was deposited on the wall on the 11th or 12th of March, because of course Susan's position would be that they're old stains. If it is her fingerprint and those stains are on the wall, even if they are in blood, they're old stains. I didn't kill my auntie, so they can't be my blood. They can't be blood from my hands on the night of the murder. Also regarding Superintendent Kerr, his statement was that he had made he had seen these things and seen these marks and taken them seriously from the first moment of the investigation. And the CCRC asked Superintendent Kerr to ask another senior police officer who was there at the time, Mr. Moreland, DCI Moreland, what his remembrance and recollections of those stains on that morning were. And so he said to the CCRC, I spoke to ex-DCI Moreland about this recollection of the scene. He was only present during the morning of the 12th of March and can remember only a series of bloodstains marks on the wall in question. He can remember only a series of blood-stained marks on the wall in question. Mr. Moreland had no recollection. When talked to again by the CCRC, Mr. Moreland had no recollection of such a conversation with Mr. Kerr about the blood-stained marks on the wall and could think of no reason why he would have told Mr. Kerr that he could remember the marks on the wall. He has never had such a conversation with anyone. Mr. Moreland repeated that he had never seen the marks on the wall and said that he would have mentioned them in his report and statement if he had seen them. Mr. Moreland reflected that the fact that he had not mentioned the marks on the wall in his report and statement shows that his current recollection is consistent. So the other senior police officer who should have been there, who wasn't there at the time when Superintendent Kerr is saying that the stains were noticed, he says he has no knowledge of them. You would think, wouldn't you, that when the national database you'd think your blood would be full of DNA, wouldn't you? And you'd think that the national database they'd get some blood out of you to get the DNA for their national record, wouldn't you? Well, they don't. They just come and get a swab and put it in your mouth. They get some of your spit. They get some of your saliva, and that's a rich source of DNA, your saliva. When I was asked at this time when we presented this document to the CCRC, one of the commissioners that we were talking to asked, well, where did the DNA come from then? And we'd racked, where did the blood come from was the question we've been asking all for so. Where did the DNA come from? And of course, this is the house of an old lady, and the old lady walking along by that wall looks at the wall and sees the dirty mark. Have you got a grandma? What did she do? If your grandma saw down, she got her hanky out, she spit on it, and she rubbed it. There's your DNA. Easy as that. The problem of DNA as evidence in these kind of trials has been identified by a judge called Judge Weir in a case called Sean Hoy in 2007. And just read some of just a couple of brief extracts from him, where he's saying we must be really careful if we're talking about if we're going to use DNA, we've got to be really careful with it. Everyone agreed that especially stringent measures must be taken to avoid the contamination of samples. The defence submit correctly in my judgment that is for the prosecution to establish the integrity and freedom from possible contamination of each item throughout the entirety of the period between seizure and any examination relied upon. This means that each person who has dealt with the item in the interviewing period must be ascertainable and be able to demonstrate by reference to some proper system of bagging, labelling and recording that the item has been preserved at every stage free from the suspicion of interference or contamination. There's a whole, my sister is the authority on this, but there's a whole host of situations where contamination could have occurred, not least in the transportation of the DNA of the blood samples, these DNA samples from one place to another, where they were kept in a bag that had the 90 Auntie's 90 in it, which had blood on it. So there's number one. On to part two, the evidence that's come to light since that presentation that we made. Over the years, Susan's always been anxious about the actual fingerprint evidence, and she'd wanted us to look into it, but we never had photographs, and fingerprints are fingerprints, aren't they? You know, we all know that, don't we? But the Shirley Mackay case in Scotland stirred everybody up about fingerprints, and so from that investigation, Susan made contact with one of the forensic fingerprint experts, and he came to see us. I'll never forget when we were putting the photographs of the fingerprints that we had on the table. When I put this photograph up, and we were all around the table, his first words were, "That is a photograph of a fingerprint made in sweat, not in blood at all." That was his first words. I was gobsmacked. Well, we all were, you know. And I had to ask him to repeat it. I said, will you repeat what you just said for me, please? I could hardly believe it, because blood is all that's been said all this time. And he repeated it. That is a fingerprint made in sweat, not blood. And he explained it in this way, from this photograph, that obviously this is just smudged, so, you know, but you can see lots of dots. Those dots are pore marks, and this has been enhanced, so sweat comes out of your pore mark, doesn't it? So it comes out as a little tiny glob as it's coming out. So those little blobs are the sweat marks, which would then, you know, form the fingerprint that you might leave on a glass, for instance. But if you were leaving a fingerprint, if there were blood on your hand, then you wouldn't see the sweat marks. The blood would stain the sweat, and it would stain all the fingerprint, and it would make a full line. You get a full line going along. And so, you know, that was his initial presentation to us. And then over the next period of time, he gave us more details. And eventually he gave us this report, which the CCRC have obviously got and are taken seriously. Just want to put this photograph up at the same time, just to say that we'll be discussing part of the stain, and it's that black blob thing there. We'll be discussing that later. So that's obviously an enhanced photograph, and that blob over there we'll be discussing later. So I just wanted to put that up so that you could you could see it for yourselves with your own eyes on a big photograph. So this report, I'm just going to give you some excerpts from this report. It's by Ari Zeelenberg, and he's from the national. He's retired now, but he's from the National Police in the Netherlands. He worked from 1982 until January 2012 as a fingerprint expert for the National Fingerprint Service, a department of the National Police Agency, as deputy and head of that department. During my career, he says, I have visited and investigated hundreds of crime scenes and have analysed and compared thousands of finger marks. So this is not a two-bit man, this is a top man. And he just thanks the CCRC for getting him the photographs. We had to apply for the photographs that he uses in his report to the Forensic Science Services in Manchester, and fair play to them, they finally let us have them. I think we'd been trying to get them under the Freedom of Information Act and got nowhere, so now we've got them. The report starts with an initial overview. I don't know if maybe I'll give you that photograph. That's what a fingerprint in blood should look like. He gets onto the, looking at in some detail, the marks. And so section 4.2 is after treatment with iodine and ninhydrin. So after the initial enhancement treatments, but before a third treatment that was given to them, which said that they would be blood. So we're enhancing that. We've got two processes that enhance them, and then a third process that says they're blood, supposedly. And so these photographs, these statements, are relating to the treatment after the enhancement processes, iodine and ninhydrin. And he says in certain locations on the marks, as he looks at them, they're marks showing that the development of the mark primarily took place around isolated dots. This is what I was saying earlier. These dots represent the location of the pores and the secreted sweat spread around them. These phenomena are typical for sweat marks developed with ninhydrin. These phenomena are typical of sweat marks developed with ninhydrin. If the fingers were covered with a transfer medium that responded to the detection techniques applied, such as blood, then the medium would have spread more evenly over the friction ridges and independent of the location of the pores. The blood would have stained the sweat and you wouldn't see it. There are no signs that blood was present between the ridges into the furrows, and no connection of the ridges at the contours of the print. This is to be expected when fingers with wet blood are pressed against a surface. So the idea is that if you've got lots of blood on your finger and you press it on make a fingerprint, blood squeezes out, and all around the outside is a ring of squeezed out blood, which is called the halo effect. That halo effect does not exist in these photographs relating to Susan. There's photographs here in the document. His intermediate conclusion at that point is the phenomena observed in mark A1 are typical for a finger mark placed with sweat and developed with ninhydrin, and inconsistent with a finger placed with wet blood. As he's gone in and looked at the actual stain, not the whole handprint now, but just that fingerprint again, there is no evidence that marks A1 and A2, that's where it was, were placed with blood. The marks instead show properties that are typical for developed sweat marks. There is a strong evidence that the marks were not placed with blood, and definitely not with a hand dripping from blood, which is what was said. And then he goes on then to consider the marks and what they look like after they've been treated with the third stain or the third test that was used. So it's called TAB, TAB, tetraaminobiphenols was used. So after those stains, he goes on to say these. Well, this is his intermediate conclusion. After those stains, images of the marks from before and after treatment with TAB do not show or prove any effect of TAB. There was no improvement of clarity or expansion of the marks A1 and A2, but rather the opposite. This is a contraindication of any blood being present in the marks. When the TAB was applied, if the substance had been blood, it should have increased the intensity of the image. And then it says small dark stains adjacent to JH1. That's that little stain that I showed you in that first picture on the print of the forefinger. There is a stain visible, and so this becomes quite evident, quite strong new evidence in my opinion. So if we try and take a little bit of care over this. There is a dark stain visible in mark JH1, just under the location corresponding with the position of the right index finger. Although very small, this mark has properties consistent with a wet tip, possibly of a finger. The fluid could be blood. There are a few short lines visible reminiscent of ridge detail. This mark has no indication value, and if it is a fingertip, it could come from any person. So it's not identifiable to any person. What is obvious is that the colour of this stain is different from the colour of the finger mark. It looks darker and more patent. These properties set it apart from the mark JH1. What he's saying is it's a separate stain. It's a stain put on top of another stain. It is unlikely that this mark is placed in a reversed sequence. Fingertip first, mark JH1 afterwards. Because the index mark is much lighter and faint, with a different colour, and shows no properties of a wet transfer medium, whilst the fingertip mark seemingly does. So the mark is on top of the fingerprint. If the marks are not placed in sequence, it dates the dark wet mark in a time period before or after the hand and finger marks of JH1, and as logical consequence may originate from another unknown donor. Overall conclusion. The overall conclusion, based upon the study and analysis of all the images of the marks A1 and A2, is clear. There is no evidence to support the proposition of the police and prosecution that the marks were placed with wet blood. There is very strong contradicting evidence instead. Most likely, marks A1 and A2 are combination prints consisting of sweat and a minor residue of or another unknown transfer medium that did not respond to detection techniques sensitive to blood. It then in the report goes on to look at how the investigation was carried out, and he's not very pleased. But there's a section here relating to Joanne Ashworth, the lady that I said was supposed to be an impressive witness at the last appeal. So I will read sections of this section for you because we need to know. In the testimony provided by Joanne Ashworth in the year 2000, it is stated that she applied Castlemere tests. She does neither make a detailed contemporary account of what she did, nor photographs, and forgot to write the results down because she did not consider it necessary. This action, failures of actions, and attitude go beyond the definition of bad practice, and at the same time question the reliability of the late reported results. Late because they were not recorded at the time of the murder. More about that a little bit later on. She's doing this in 2000, not in 1992. From literature, it is known that the Castlemere test requires a careful application and interpretation. Castlemere is also known to give false positives because it may react similar with other substances. And at one level, I just need to register also my understanding that this is not Mr. Zeelenberg's prime expertise, but what he's observing, anybody can see. Just to refer to what he has to say about DNA. Again, we observe he's not a DNA expert, but he's a very experienced man, and so we should not take his opinion lightly. The detection of DNA in a sample is no proof of blood. The DNA techniques are so sensitive that often touched objects will all show the presence of DNA. It is normal and to be expected that the wall in question could carry DNA from persons with legitimate access. It is known that even fingerprint brushes can pick up DNA and contaminate areas that are dusted afterwards. And then his final conclusions in his report say this. Based upon my analysis of the images of the marks and evaluation of all the activities and statements of the investigating team, I conclude that there is no evidence that the finger marks A1 and A2 attributed to Susan May were placed in blood. In fact, there is overwhelming evidence that they were not comprised of blood, but instead of sweat and a minor residue of another unknown substance. Very clear, senior man that must be given full respect. When we got that report, Harry himself encouraged us to seek a second opinion. And so we sought a second opinion from a man called Professor Joseph Almog in Israel. He's a top blood analyst and fingerprint expert again. And so he gave us this comment. So he says, this letter is by no means an expert's report. So he's just registering that he doesn't know everything about everything, but he's read the report. And it is not meant to be presented in court. My opinion is based solely on reviewing the overview of Susan May's case and Harry Zeelenberg's report. He makes two statements. One, I agree with most of the conclusions in Harry's comprehensive report. There are some minor inaccuracies regarding the interpretations of the visual appearance of the finger marks, but they are marginal regarding the full picture. The main point, which Harry very clearly puts his finger on, is the question whether Susan's fingerprints were made in blood or not. Her latent finger marks at the scene are of very little evidential value since she was a frequent visitor to the place. Bloody prints, on the other hand, would change the entire situation. If the finger marks were made in blood, not any blood, but the blood of the victim, it would add heavy weight to her association with the murder. This should have been the prime concern of the crime scene officers. From reading the report, it seems they did a rather sloppy job on these 2 points. They neither proved the blood nor its origin. The CCRC then went to the top man in England, or Britain, not sure, and asked for his opinion on Harry's report. Professor Zeelenberg has noted that there is a dark stain visible in mark JH1 just underneath the location corresponding with the position of the right index. After reviewing the image of this stain below, it does appear that it could be blood. Professor Zeelenberg then considers the likelihood that the stain was made by contact before the mark was made or afterwards. After reviewing the image, I agree with Professor Zeelenberg that if it is as a result of a separate action, whilst the blood was wet, it is most likely to have occurred after the ridge detail had been laid down. So that's a fingerprint, and then this is on top of the fingerprint. The edges of the stain are quite distinct, and there does not appear to have been any movement of the material, if it is blood, into the rest of the mark. So he's saying that it's going on top of that mark, and it's different from it, and it's going on top of it, which is quite a substantial thing to be introducing to the case at this time. I am in agreement with Professor Zeelenberg that the level of note-taking, so he's relating to the TAB test now, the test that's supposed to be positive for blood. I am in agreement with Professor Zeelenberg that the level of note-taking was insufficient to support some of the opinions present in Mr. Hussain's report. It does appear that more detail is given in Mr. Hussain's statement than is given in his scene notes, suggesting that he has relied on memory or saying what would be standard practice. After making some inquiries as to how DAB was applied at the time of the examination, it appears that it was not done in a two-step process as it is done now. The need to carry out DAB, this is a really key issue, the need to carry out DAB in such a two-step process is that there are a number of other substances that can give a dab positive reaction, such as certain microorganisms, plant materials, and heavy metal ions. I'll read that again. The need to carry out dab in such a two-step process is that there are a number of other substances that can give a dab positive reaction, such as certain microorganisms, plant materials, and heavy metal ions. The evidence at trial from the expert that did this blood test was that he could think of no other material that would have reacted in the same way as his test things did, other than blood. He could think of no other material other than blood that would have reacted in that way. And what this man is saying is that there are a number of other substances that give a dab positive reaction. More again of that later. However, we need to consider the likelihood, and then this is a strong, again, kind of concluding remark. However, we need to consider the likelihood that the marks appeared to be composed of blood and reacted to all the techniques in the way they did, and yet were actually composed of something that appeared to be blood but was not. Top British man. The CCRC went to the forensic science people and asked them who's the best in the country, and this man was given to them as the best in the country for making this report. I'm not allowed to give you his name because they've required us to keep his name confidential. Sorry. And then he goes, I agree with Professor Zeelenberg that the poor practice of not documenting the results calls into question their reliability. And then his summary is, well, his summary is not kind to Harry at the first part of it. Not kind to Mr. Zeelenberg at the first part of it. This last part says, however, the information to properly support these findings have regrettably not been documented fully in Mr. Hussein's or Mrs. Ashworth's examination notes. Given the techniques available at the time of his examination, cannot criticise Mr. Hussein's overall approach to examining the scene, apart from the lack of note-taking to support conclusions. So he still wants to be kind to his British counterparts. So that's the two new reports that we got since we went to the CCRC in 2012. I want to take you right back to the very beginning, and this report is from a scientist that the defence team got, but they never used. They got this guy and they never used him on the stand. They should have brought him to the stand and they should have allowed him to say the things. Basically, I don't think they knew what they were talking about themselves, so they'd not got their head around it. And in a sense, it's not difficult to see why they didn't get their head around it, because the recording information by these forensic people was non-existent. So it's only just been sort of picked up and gleaned here and there over all the years that we've been looking at the case. So there's a measure of the sympathy for them. I know how long it's taken myself to just simply get a timeline for the events that took place in the investigation. But this man he was outside the court. They could have shouted it for him and they could have brought him in, and they didn't. And he asks a really good, important question for us here. So he says, turning to the stains. So we're now on the third time the third application of chemicals that this man called Javed Hussein made to the three stains that were on the wall. And so he says, turning to the stains that had fingerprints in them. He uses his tetraamino-biphenyl, and he says, and so he's just recording that. Mr. Walker is recording that this is what has been said. He can think, Mr. Hussein can think of nothing other than blood that would have given similar reactions to the tests he employed. And then this is what George Walker says. I feel he is being too dogmatic. None of the tests are conclusive. Iodine is not normally used as a test for blood. Ninhydrin is usually employed to develop fingerprints on paper. It reacts with sweat. the use of tab was abandoned because it was considered carcinogenic. It undoubtedly gave some false positives. Hussein, and then this is key now to where we're going, Hussein has produced no scientific paper that indicated tetraaminobiphenyl will react with nothing other than blood. 6 or 8 months ago, someone sent me that scientific paper that Hussein produced regarding the tab test. Here it is. It's not a test at all. It's not a test at all. This is the title of the paper, the scientific paper that Javed Hussein made regarding the tab test, which this was written in March 1989, 3 years prior to the murder. It's called The Enhancement of Marks Made in Blood with Tetraaminobiphenyl. The enhancement of marks made in blood. It's not the presumptive test for blood. It's the enhancement of marks. It's a process to enhance marks. Primarily, it's a process to enhance marks that are already known to be blood. I looked for this document years and years ago on the web, Googled it, and typed in tab and tetraaminobiphenyl, and all I got was stuff that I'd written. And that's because the technical note here, for scientific papers in general, they are not available for release to other organisations, so they're kept in-house. So that's why we never did find it. But it's referred to in the top British man's report, and it's for the use of enhancers. So there's the use to for the enhancement of finger blood marks. And so he's proposing this paper now is an argument for using this method to enhance marks rather than the existing method at the time, which was amido black. That's the whole discussion of this paper. Nothing to do with presumptive test for blood. But in this paper, he does indicate that he does understand regarding presumptive tests for blood. So he quotes 3 different kinds of presumptive tests for blood. One component of blood, namely the heme component of the protein hemoglobin, can be readily detected by a number of reagents, including leukemia green, benzidine, and Castlemeyer reagents. These reagents are very sensitive and have been or still are in use as presumptive tests for blood. These reagents are very sensitive and have been or still are in use as presumptive tests for blood. He knows that there are reagents that are very sensitive that may be used as presumptive tests, and he is not using one of them. He's using this thing of his own invention, and it's noted like that in the trial. We'll maybe see that later on. And just to confirm that that's what this document's all about, the last paragraph of it says, in certain circumstances, the use of tetraaminobiphenyl reagent tab can result in better enhancement than that achieved with amido black. I just want to start by saying something that the judge said in his summing up. In his summing up of the evidence regarding Susan's financial involvement with her aunt's money, it was an issue that took over half of the time of the trial. The trial took 10 days, and over half of that time was in relationship to the money. Had Susan embezzled all the money, and did she murder her aunt to get the house? We've spoken about that. Won't do it in any detail here. But just to say this is what the judge said. Members of the jury, I do suggest that we resist all of those temptations and assume in the defendant's favour that her assertions as to the financial matters are broadly correct. that her assertions as to the financial matters are broadly correct. Now, when the judge says that, what he's actually just done is he's made this a motiveless murder. If Susan hasn't murdered her aunt for her money, then what's her motive? She hasn't got a motive. The judge has just removed the motive for the murder. And so we have a motiveless murder on our hands for the jury. Talking about the DNA earlier on, and about how crime scenes can be contaminated and how blood can get everywhere, we just want to observe that the crime scene was contaminated by at least two people who went to the scene. The first was the senior investigating officer, Superintendent William Kerr, who openly admits that he went up to the body and he touched the face, which was blooded, as you've seen, or you've seen. He touched the face and he touched the pillow. Initially, for the trial, he said he was doing that to see how long, whether she was dead or not, and then he apologised for that for the second appeal, and he said he was doing it because he wanted to see how long, to test the temperature to see how long she would have been dead for. But nevertheless, the result of him, whether he did it or not, he needed to have a statement that said that the stains were dry, because so that Susan couldn't say that she touched them and got her blood on her hands to do it. So somebody had to say that the stains were dry. So whether he ever did this or not, I'm not sure. But if he did, and he said he did, and he said it twice under oath, then two things occur. He's got blood on his hands from those stains. Whether he likes it or not, he's got an amount of blood on his hands, and even if not got blood, he has to have blood on his hands from that transfer, simply by touching. And if he hasn't got blood, he's got DNA. He cannot have made contact with that lady's face and with the blood on the pillow without having got DNA on his hands. So anywhere he goes now, he can spread DNA all around. If he identifies those fingerprints on the wall with his fingers, there's your DNA. I said I think it's probably the lady's spit, but he could have done it. It's as simple as that. The other thing that was said, particularly regarding the third stain, which was just a smear and not fingerprints, was when was that made? Do we know when that was made? And we don't know when that was made, but they interviewed. It's near the light switch, you see, and that light switch was operated at least 4 times. It was turned on and off and turned on again. So it was operated at least 3 times. And the ambulance men, who also had legitimate reason to touch the face, they were checking for pulses and things like that, signs of life. They were interviewed and said that they had not got blood on their hands. They remembered that they had gloves on their hands and that the gloves were clean. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it might be right in their memory, but the simple fact of the matter is that on the pillow adjacent to there's 2 beds. On the second bed, on the pillow of the second bed, which is one of the ambulance of men would be around that side, on that pillow was a flake of dry blood, which was found. So that flake of dry blood must have come from the hands of the ambulance men. Can't see the murderer walking around there and putting some dry blood over there. So they're there in the morning. There's blood on the, there's scabs on the thing. They pick a flake of a drying piece of blood on their hands, turn around, touch the pillow. They've transferred that flake over there. And when they drop the flake, there's a residue on their hand, which might be enough for them to, as they leave the room, as they turn the light switch out, for them to leave it by the side of the light switch. That's a realistic potential, in my opinion, for that third stain, which was said to be which was prominent at trial because that stain had tested to be human blood, and later on Brinkman did find that to have DNA in it of Hilda. So it was because that was human that in the trial they could refer to the others as being human as well. So the scene had being contaminated. I want to just talk you through the murder scene because it's horrific, and I just want to use this photograph of this pillow to use as a backdrop for this section. Hilda was in bed, and the person who came to her accosted her in bed. And he, obviously, it's a burglar, it's not Susan, it's a burglar, so he wants to know where the money is. Where's she got any valuables? Where's the money? Where's the jewels? And so, in essence, he tortures her. The pathologist report records that there are bruises in the neck consistent with the man having raised her off the bed with his left hand. So he's holding her in his left hand, and he's beating her black and blue. He's beating her black and blue. You saw the photograph. And he wants to know where the money is. And she hasn't got any money because Susan does all her money. And on the face, on the left side, there's a blood blister the size of an egg. And nobody else has said this, but that blood blister must have been caused by her being pinched by her attacker. And it's obvious. He's pinching her face and demanding to know where the money is. That's my opinion. That's my thoughts on that. Nobody else has written that down anywhere. And then the scenario is that she can't tell him anything. He's so annoyed, and he puts her down on back on the pillow. And then the police's scenario is, and tell us that she didn't die because she was beaten. She died because she was suffocated, and she was suffocated by having the pillow brought over her face and put on like that. And so this blood that you see is all that's come out of the blood blister. It's all to the head would be here, and it's all that consistent with having been brought up over her face. The scenario regarding Susan is that now she's got blood on her hands from beating her auntie. She turns around and puts blood on the wall as she leaves the room. But my observation is that if she's got blood on her hands from beating her to death, then she withdraws from that scene to put her hands on the pillow. Before she goes to the wall, she puts her hand on the pillow to do the final act. Now, if you look at the pillow, there ought to be blood here, and there ought to be blood here. You know? And there isn't. There's no blood. There's another photograph of the other side of the pillow, and but it's too ugly for me to show you. And I assure you that it's as clean as this side here. And even if the murderer had, well, you see, the murderer had done that. The murderer didn't get blood on his hands because there was no blood on his hands at the point of the murder. The blood only occurred when the blood blister burst. Susan was made the prime suspect on the 23rd. So this document is a recording of a conversation between William Kerr and the senior scene of crimes officer who was responsible for testing any marks that were supposed to be blood. He was the go-to person to test a mark if it was supposed to be blood. Called Michael John Davey. And in this conversation, it starts off by this is the 23rd. Have we got the blood grouping for the stains on the wall? And the answer comes back, no. As explained at the scene, there's presumably insufficient material. Look at what we've seen. Insufficient material to do that test. Maybe we can do a PCR test. So he asked the man to do a PCR test. That never gets done. This stain does not get removed from the wall until the 29th of April, 4 weeks after Susan's arrested, 6 weeks after the murder. That's how good this investigation is. On this piece of paper also is this evidence. The question comes, would blood have been wet when the niece arrived at 9 o'clock? And the answer comes back, still damp on the pillow when I got to the scene, still damp on the pillow when I got to the scene, and he got to the scene at 10:30. So there actually would have been wet blood available for Susan, if she had touched it, to make a bloody mark on the wall. That was raised at one of the appeals, and they just give us a different explanation. Oh, it wasn't at 10:30. I forgot. It was a bit later on. The statements on pieces of paper that are just being changed. We'll make it like we want to make it, you know. The CCRC had a conversation with the senior investigating officer regarding his approach to these stains at that time. What was his approach to the stains? And his approach was, he says that we thought we had, in the third stain, we knew that it was human, so that was our, we got a human stain, so these two will just try and get the fingerprints out of them. Okay? So it then goes on to say, and so we're going to iodine them and we're going to enhance them. And then then the marks were then, after this enhancement process, the marks were then useless for anything else owing to the general heat of the house and the tests that had been conducted on them in trying to identify the prints. This was after full discussion and advice from scientists. He makes that statement. After these tests, he has been given the advice that the stains would now be useless for any further testing for their origin, were they blood or not. So he knows, according to scientists, that they'll be useless for any tests. What does he do? He tests them again. And it's that test that he conducts after this occurrence that is used at trial, when they're supposed to be useless. And every test that anybody's ever done since then, according to Kerr, is useless. Once again, this is strange. I just point out one observation. This 23rd of March was the day that Susan was made made a prime suspect. All they knew that day was that they've got a fingerprint. That was the day they found out it was her fingerprint, supposedly. They didn't, it would be the next day when they would test for blood, and that would be the test that they would use to go to trial with, which Kerr said should be considered as useless. They didn't use the test by the, nobody said this, of course, but they didn't use the test by the scene of crimes man who was the go-to person, Davy, because eventually the CCRC discovered so many anomalies in the way that he had carried out his work that he couldn't be relied upon. This is a report when the CCRC contacted Davies, the Forensic Science Service themselves. They carried out a report on him, and in that report there are 26 concerns that the Forensic Science Service have regarding the work that he did. But alongside that, and more serious, is the fact that the prominent things that he did wrong was that he amended the scene notes. This is his contemporaneous scene. That's the notes from the day. So they're sacrosanct. That's your memory. That's your sacrosanct. That's your memory. And that's how they appeared on that day. I've highlighted where you now need to look. This was discovered by the CCRC. There's another set, and on this set, he writes that he's done a Castlemere test for blood on here, KM positive. That whole thing's a bit suspicious to me. Why is it written sideways? Why is it not written down here? Then why is that added? And it was added at the time prior to the first appeal, when the solicitors were asking for his test records of, that he'd said it was Castlemere positive. So everybody put loads of weight on the fact that this man had said it was Castlemere positive all through the investigation, and even afterwards we put loads of weight on that, but he was never called for trial. It was the other fellow that was called for trial. We'll look at him a bit later on. The other, even more damaging piece of information regarding Michael John Davey is that he forged, for that request, he actually forged a test record document and sent that to the CCRC discovered that was a forged document because he wrote it on a form that hadn't existed in a year previously. So that's and so therefore he was, at the second appeal, his evidence was discredited. Unfortunately, that report had been made available to the defence, but they'd not, if they wanted to see it, but they'd not asked for it. And if they'd asked for it, they'd have known that Davy's evidence would have to be withdrawn, and they could have entered into the second appeal in a much stronger position regarding the forensic issues. So, just this is Michael John Davy's witness statement. He took the stain off the wall 6 weeks later, or somebody took the stain off the wall 6 weeks later, took it round to his lab to see if he could find if it was of human origin. They'd presumed, by whatever means, they presumed it to be blood, but was it of human origin? And so on the 29th of April, he attempted to check that. Attempts, and this is what he says, attempts to determine whether or not the blood stains GH1 and GH2 were of human origin gave no results. Gave no results. He could not show them scientifically to be of human origin. He did not know that they were of human origin. If they were blood, they could have been blood for something else, but he could not show them to be blood of human origin. That test has never been repeated. So when you want to say that you've got a stain that relates to something, to a certain person, there are 4 tests that you do on it. You test it to see, you presume it to be blood, and you test it to see so you use a Castlemere test. And if it passes that test, that doesn't mean it's blood, but it means it might be. Then you go on to a precipitating test, which is what this was, to show it to be of human origin. If it then shows itself to be of human origin, you presume the 2 tests mean that it's blood of human origin, right? Then you can have it, what blood grouping is it? That's not particularly relevant to a crime scene investigation. And then the third test you would normally do would be a DNA test to say which individual human being it belongs to. This is that middle test. This is that second test that shows it to be not of human origin. We don't know that it's of human origin. So we need that test before ever any DNA analysis can tell you that it's blood of somebody's particular blood. Other than that, any DNA that's found can be DNA from anything. Can be DNA from anything. Spit, snot, anything. So that's the bit that I want to get from Davy's, the shambles of, and in my opinion, just to say this, if the FSS had done such a report on any of the other forensic people involved, they would have also come up with as many concerns for them. I just want to look at the evidence of the 3 key witnesses now in the trial. This is the evidence. This is the evidence in chief. This is the transcript of what went on at the appeal. So this first one. I'll look at the blood expert, the guy who came along, who wasn't Davy, when they were both in the house at the same time, and there was a blood sample that there's a stain that was said to is that stain blood or not? Hussein didn't go and check it. Davy went and checked it. Okay, so this is the issue. First issue is, who is it? You know. So Javed is saying, what is your specialism? Here it is. What is your specialism at the Forensic Science Laboratory? And his specialism, he says, is answer, fingerprint detection and enhancement. Fingerprint detection and enhancement. And so on the 19th of March, he goes to the house and does the iodine and the ninhydrin processes and enhances the stain to the degree that we get that one result. That's like a page in his statement. And then on the 24th, he's asked to go back on the 24th, and you have to ask, why is he asked to go back rather than Davy? Well, we know Davy's not very, you know, and if the police knew that Davy weren't reliable, they've got to find somebody else, haven't they? So they asked this fella. And so on the 24th, did you re-enter the scene? Yes, I did. Were you requested to treat the area of staining with a further reagent which would enable you to express an opinion as to whether or not these areas had been laid in blood? Yes, I was. So this was not now a fingerprint test, but merely to find out whether the fingerprints were in fact in blood. Yes, that's correct. Somebody in that court at that moment should have shouted out objection. It shouldn't have been brought for a start, so the CPS were wrong to bring this man because he's not an expert. He's an expert in fingerprint detection and enhancement. He's not an expert in testing stains for blood. It's not his expertise. So it's not now a fingerprint test, it's a test for blood. Objection, Your Honour. This is not his expertise. And that's a crime. So this man then, for the rest of his testimony, is testifying to the fact that these stains are blood, and it's not he's not qualified to make these statements. And so he makes a statement. Here we go. Page 4, section A. The material behaved exactly as I would have expected had it been blood. Then, no, I can think of no other material which would have behaved in that way, save for blood. And then he says this, based on my visual examination and the results I obtained with all three reagents, it's my opinion that all three areas were made in blood. The first two reagents he used have nothing to do with them being blood. So what's he saying that for? Overstating his case, you see. Embellishing and overstating his case. He's then cross-examined. So our man is clever enough to know there's a question to be asked. The use of tab for this purpose, presumptive test for blood, is a relatively new technique, is it not? Yes, it is. Yes, it is, he said. Now, he should have said, where's your scientific paper? Remember what Walker said. Where's your scientific paper to demonstrate that this is a valid test and that it's specific enough? It's sensitive enough and specific enough for blood. But he doesn't say that. He just lets it go. But then under cross-examination, this happens. I'll read the question. You recognise that you are able to distinguish between human blood and animal blood. I'm saying that there is room to doubt as to whether it is blood at all. That's the question. I'm saying that there is room to doubt whether it is blood at all. Then his answer is this. I am certain, in my opinion, that the material there was blood. I concede that that is not proof positive. Then the question comes again. I cannot state categorically that these stains were blood to the exclusion of all other materials. Yes. So he's trying to damage limitate. He's just got the fella to say he's certain. But in actual fact, that use of the word certain makes this man's evidence totally worthless. Because I'll show you later, there's not a scientist on the planet that would have used that word in this context against even a Castlemere test, let alone this new thing that isn't even a test at all. But I'll make the observation that even while he's on the stand, the Crown prosecution, Mr. Morris, comes back and reiterates the situation. So he questions, he asks the question, can you think of any other material which would have produced those marks on that wall which reacted in the same way as the reagent that you applied? The answer is, not which would have reacted in the same way and also have had the same appearance. Question, so your opinion that you expressed the certainty that the material was blood. The certainty that the material was blood. So he's picked up on the word certain, which wasn't in the script previously. And the judge, of course, will pick up on that later on in his summing up. So the jury are being misled badly. This is the evidence in chief of the fingerprint expert Geoffrey Abbott. As we've said, there was no photograph standing back from the wall to look at the wall. So they have to produce that other one that I showed you earlier. So they have to use this stand away thing, which has got the stained, emboldened marks on it. And so the Crown prosecution said to Geoffrey Abbott now, we're identifying what we're looking at. So that we can merely identify the area, could you look at Exhibit 6, please? If you would like to look at Photograph 1, Sergeant Abbott, merely to identify the area with which you were concerned. Does that show the particular area? It does so. So this is the photograph. We haven't got a proper photograph. We're going to use this one. It gets worse. And then he does at this point admit that the wall itself, we will hear about in due course, had also been treated by the time that photograph was taken. So he does at this point admit that that photograph has been enhanced. So as he says, he's looking at the stains, what did the impression appear to you to have been made in? It appeared to me to have been made in blood. Whoa! Objection. Nobody objects, of course, but he's not allowed to say that. He's not allowed. Comes out in cross-examination, but this man now goes on 16 times to refer to this stain as blood, and he's not a blood expert. He's just a fingerprint expert. It's not his scientific expertise. Legally speaking, he's not allowed to do that. And then we come to this helpful bit, the stain on that blobby bit on the forefinger of the right hand. Blood in one finger in particular had run downwards. Blood in one finger particularly had run downwards. Only blood in one finger had run down. And but it gets extrapolated. So blood everywhere is running down, you see. That's how it comes to be viewed. Blood everywhere is running down. And this is the separate spot that's running down that wasn't even made at the time that the handprint was made. What is it upon that led you to the conclusion that the original print had been put on in wet blood? Again, looking at the finger impression on the left, that's the right finger. At the bottom of that impression, there's a dark area of very dark staining. You can see dark staining would be okay. Dark blood is not good. You can see that the effect there, the blood has run downwards. Blood has been on the ridges of the finger, the friction ridges, and it's also there in the furrows. There is a very, very dark staining on the ridges themselves, and in between those, a lighter shade of staining. It indicated to me that at the time that finger or those fingers were put on the wall, the blood that was on there was wet. So he's got that finger and those fingers, all these fingers in wet running blood. That will lead the judge to say, if you and I had been in the room on that day, we would have seen a bloody handprint. But we observe for ourselves now that if those two things were made at separate times, if the fingerprint was made at one time and then the stain was made at another time, and we think that the blobby stain was on top, there is a time difference. And therefore, that suggests that the fingerprint was what we've always said, an old stain made sometime in the past. And whether on that day or whether some other day somebody came and made that other mark, whatever it is, whether it's blood or not, it distances the fingerprint from the murder. The judge interrupts at this point. Just a moment. Photograph number 2 is not the first, but the second palm print, is it not? And then what follows, that page, this page, and down to this page, is we haven't got the right photographs in the right order. Council's got the photographs in one order. The judges have got their copies of these photographs and they're not in the right order, so they're all looking at the wrong photograph at the wrong time. What the jury are looking at, I have the clue, but the conversation, of course, between the QC and the judge, they don't know, they don't know what they're looking at. So and initially the QC gets a bit annoyed with only very slightly, but then in the end he says, "My lord, I do apologise. It does appear that the order of photographs which I have appears to be different. Does your lordship have a photograph 2 and 3 which appears to be identical?" And honestly, it's a complete mess. And I'll read something the judge says again. He's apologising. Mr. Morrill is apologising again. "None of you have got it, have you? Members of the jury." So the members of the jury haven't got it. "Some of you have got it? Question mark. In the back row, your photograph 2 does not look like that. Some of them have it, some do not. Shall we have a short retirement for regrouping?" This is the key evidence. This is the main plank of the main plank. "What I suggest, my lord," this is the QC. "What I suggest, this is absolutely bonkers. What I suggest, my lord, is that we continue for the moment with the officer giving his evidence. He is about to go to the middle print, in any event, of which the jury, of course, have an abundance of photographs." Maybe. But they're going to carry on giving the evidence with everybody in total confusion as to what picture is supposed to be showing what. Apart from the problem of the fact that they're using photographs that all have been enhanced and are not using photographs of the stains that were on the wall in their original condition. It continues. The problem with the photographs and whether they're looking at photographs that have been enhanced or not has not been made clear. And so when Mr. Karras, the defence QC, comes to cross-examine, he's just full of questions that do not eventually get answered. So even the judge is interrupting again. "Do you mean photograph number 2? So there's no cohesion in this presentation at all, to the point that this Mr. Karras wants to step back from it and say, "Hang on a minute, he wants to look at photograph number 1 just to get the general layout. Of the second mark, the middle mark, was seen by you, was subsequently enhanced." And he's looking at the first photograph and saying that mark is subsequently enhanced. Well, it's not subsequently enhanced, it's already enhanced at this point. He's in total confusion, but he's trying to get it right. And so in his next question, he refers to photographs that are enhanced later. Well, no, they've been enhanced already. This evidence is being received on total the wrong premise. The question you have, I think, initially saying you assume, I'm reading this difficult because it's not written properly. Initially saying that you assumed them dropping that and saying that these marks were left in blood, and you spoke about wet blood. You do not, in fact, know what the substance was, do you? No, I'm not an expert in these matters. But he's got away with it to the, all the way to the end of the cross-examination. And then they have to spend some time doing something, these people, don't they? So he spends 2 pages talking about whether there are any fingerprints in gloves or in woolen, you put gloves on. Burglars put gloves on now, don't they? So they won't get... And then they run out of time. It gets to dinner time. So the judge says, is this witness going to have to come back again? So Mr. Morris says, merely to identify for the jury's benefit the missing photograph. Okay, so they come back after lunch. Mr. Morris says, my lord, I understand that the jury's bundle of photographs, Exhibit 6, has now been altered and photograph number 2 now should show the right hand instead of the left hand. That's good. Right, so that's Mr. Morris, that's the prosecution QC, clarifying that he's got the photographs now in the right order. So Mr. Karras then, the defence QC, carries on, muttering about gloves and things. So when he finishes, the Crown QC comes back, Mr. Morris comes back, so to just make it clear to everybody that it's all fine and dandy, we've got all the pictures in the right order now, haven't we? This is what happens. So Mr. Morris says, Sergeant, to the man, to Mr. Abbott, although this does not arise out of cross-examination, can you just look at photograph number 2, just to confirm it does appear now, just to confirm it does now appear to be blank, blank, blank. You have not got a copy? No, it's disappeared. This is the evidence in chief of Mavis Jean Brady, the cleaner. And I hold her in no... It's not her business. She's misled the court. Or, the court had been misled badly by this lady's testimony. But it's not her fault at all. It's how she's been handled and used. She's a cleaner. She was there on the day before the murder. And she gives evidence... if you saw any dirty marks on the walls or doors, what would you do? Well, have a go at getting them off, round light switches and things like that. If there had been any dirty marks on the wall at that time, what would you have done about them? Well, if I had seen any, I would have had a go at trying to get them off. That's my job. Had you previously cleaned stains or marks off that particular wall? Yes, tea stains. And like when I used to go in the morning, we used to take our breakfast trolley in that way, and it was very narrow between the bed and the wall, and we had to turn the trolley round. But we had to push the bed out of the way, because it was always banging against the wall, and marked. Unmarked, you say? Yes, it got marked. The wall is full of marks. This lady's testimony. The judge just only says that, in his summing up, that if her testimony was if she'd seen any marks, she'd have had a go at getting them off. She's here telling us exactly what we saw in the photograph, which was not shown to the jury, how badly that wall was marked and stained. So he asks her, do you remember seeing any marks on the wall on Wednesday, the 11th of March? No, I don't. So what we have here is a clarification for everybody, if you haven't worked it out already, that this lady is giving her testimony from her memory. She's giving her testimony from her memory. Every policeman in the country carries a book around, a notebook, so if he sees something, he writes it down because his memory is suspect. So we're 12 months on from the murder and they're using her memory. Now, they got her memory a bit earlier on, 6 weeks after the murder, 6 weeks after the murder, 4 weeks after Susan was arrested. But this lady was in the house 3 days after the murder. This lady was in the house 3 days after the murder. If they'd shown her the wall then, they could have shown her the stain then and asked her, was that there yesterday? that stain there? Was that stain there yesterday? And she'd have had a really reasonable idea of whether it was or not. But she wasn't. Nobody asked her. Nobody showed her this stain before they enhanced it. She'd never seen this stain, enhanced or otherwise, until she's been asked 4 weeks after to make a statement about it, because the police are now compiling the evidence against Susan. We're really pleased that the judge was in court at this moment in time, because Karras, in cross-examining her, gets her confused. But she has got any fit, so we've already established it's got marks all over the place, and he leads her this way. So it's got any number of faint marks on it, hasn't it? I don't know. It's got some marks I can't get off, splash marks. But she's frustrated. He wants her to say more. And then Lord Justice Hutchinson, or Mr. Justice Hutchinson, interrupts the proceedings because she's just humming to his answers. And so he asks the question for the counsel. What counsel is suggesting is that this wall, which he implies has not been painted for 2 or 3 years, anyway, had a lot of little marks and scuffs on it. Now, is that what you remember or not? Yes. Tea stains, tea stains. You can't get them off, unless you rub the paint off. You mean it had tea stains which you had tried to get off and couldn't? Probably. Is that assent? Yes. Okay. Now this is really key. This next bit is unbelievably key. Mr. Karras, defence QC, cross-examining the lady who should have been shown the stains. And he goes out of protocol. Goes out of protocol. And says to the judge, "Would your lordship allow me a moment?" And then he says to Mrs. Brady, "Just don't open the rest of the bundle of pictures that you've got, but just look at that." And he takes this picture over to her and shows her. "I am showing the witness photograph number 9 in Exhibit 2. Do you see there's a ruler on the photograph?" "Yes." "Can you see any mark there which you would, in the normal way of cleaning, set about removing?" Her answer is no. When she is shown a photograph of the stain that's the main plank of the prosecution's case and said, "Would you have had a go at getting that one off?" she says no. It was criminal that lady was not shown that stain before. Just to complete what we're doing here, I'll just briefly introduce you to a few reports quite quickly, really. A guy called Paul Millen. I'll read it. Paul's a scene of crimes officer, and he was assistant scientific officer for the Metropolitan Police and a scene of crimes officer manager for Surrey Police as well. And basically in this report, he questions very strongly the use of tab and its validity by Javed Hussain. This report's the Brinkman report, which we've referred to. In my opinion, key to making a statement regarding the nature of the stain substance. And over the years, we've spoken to many scientists from around the place, and I've got I've got a record of 12 scientists, all of whom have corresponded with myself, or have given us reports, none of whom are happy to agree with us saying that when he says he can think of no other substance that the stains would be blood, or that he was certain. None of these scientists would have made those statements in court against the TAB test that he uses. Some of them, the top people, and some of them have never heard of TAB, so it's out of order using it basically. That's the evidence of all those. We had a substantial period where Susan's solicitor got a forensic scientist, control risks. A lady called Sue Woodruff did a really, really substantial report that helps in most areas. And again, the problem that she has is that she doesn't know anything about TAB. So because they don't know anything about it, they find it difficult to comment. But you need them to comment to be able to go back to court. They want to comment. It's a lot of work. Somebody's got to produce a scientific paper, haven't they? And there isn't one. But Sue also agrees with the next report, where Alan Jamieson, a forensic scientist from a forensic institute in Glasgow, a top man again in his field of blood analysis, confirms that the TAB test is not appropriate. Any biological material tested in this way would give a positive result. Any biological material tested in this way would give a positive result. This is fundamental basic science, which I haven't got the Paisley students. We've got a report from the Paisley students in Glasgow that did a first year forensic science students did an analysis of the TAB test and how it was used by Hussein, and they came up with that statement. Any biological material would have tested positive for blood under the way Hussein used it. So basically, his test is meaningless. It's meaningless and misled everybody so badly. As I say, we've seen George Walker's report from earlier on. We again questions and wanted to see the scientific paper. There is no scientific paper showing it to be a presumptive test for blood. These things are again confirmed by a lady called Lydia Bosses, like a university professor working in a university, lecturing in a university, and she had some knowledge of the test, but even so, she agrees with Jameson. Any biological material would test positive with that test. Just slightly veering away from that now to more general issues. That we've got a report from the Office of the Supervision of Solicitors, and a member of the Law Society's negligence panel, Mr. David Jones, solicitor, member of the Law Society's negligence panel, and he reviewed whether Susan was dealt well with by her original solicitor's team, and the defence team as a whole, I suppose. And this is his concluding paragraph. It seems, therefore, from what I have seen and been told about the case, that Miss May was let down by her solicitors, and that there was glaring deficiencies in the preparation of the case, such that had those deficiencies not existed, an entirely different and stronger case may have been available at the end of the trial to go to the jury. She was not well represented by her original solicitors. I don't know how many any witnesses the prosecution brought, but they should have brought George Walker at least, and any other number of scientific witnesses, and they brought none. In a murder case, there was only one witness brought for the defence, and that was Susan's daughter, to confirm about the scratches issue. That was the only. So bad. When Susan was interviewed by the police, when she was arrested, she wasn't represented well by her solicitors at that time either. And so this man, Anthony Edwards, has done a review of those interviews. And he says, I am a solicitor of the Supreme Court, practice of criminal law. I am a supervisor for the purposes of the Specialist Fraud Panel of the Legal Services Commission. So once again, top people are talking. Top people are talking. And at page 19 somewhere here, his last paragraph says, looking at the quality of advice and assistance given by Mr. Cheetham in the interviews I have reviewed, I would assess the work in this case as significantly below competence. Significantly below competent. So you wouldn't want him looking at you, would you? The police, Susan made some complaints to the police, and the police complaints authority took up those complaints for her. Basically, the police putting words into her mouth would be the problem. And I'm looking for, so just on this one issue, to this extent, my analysis of the evidence leads me to the conclusion that the statement taken from you on the 23rd of March as a witness statement should only have been taken from you after you had been formally cautioned. Mr. Kerr should bear the main responsibility for the fact that this was not done. To this extent, your complaint is upheld. When you become a suspect, you have to be informed that you are a suspect and allowed to be cautioned and allowed a solicitor representation. That interview on the 23rd of March that they interviewed Susan with, when they knew that she was going to be their main suspect, should not have been taken by them. This is a report by Des Thomas, and he says, I am a forensic management consultant, a former deputy head of Hampshire CID, reviewing officer and senior investigating officer. My last operational deployment was as a UK-based SIO, senior investigating officer, on the 9/11 investigation. This report consists of my opinion. This report consists of my opinion is based on my experience and documents I have seen. Once again, not an insignificant person to have on your side. And I think just one towards the end of the passage, one might reasonably conclude that the investigation was not valid and fair. In short, it was a partisan search for evidence to convict Mrs. May. Such a situation may have the practical effect of restricting the evidence presented to a court, and thus inhibits its ability to come to a fair and proper judgment according to all of the evidence. There are certain ways of gathering evidence and making sure that your evidence is substantial and objective. And as I said before, you can see that if you ask a question, you might get the wrong answer. And so that's the kind of thing that Des Thomas was observing throughout the whole of the investigation in that report. Just to say that after Susan was convicted, Susan got a different solicitor, and he came up to Oldham, and he went around people in Oldham and took statements from them. And we have 52 statements from Royton people, all affirming their faith in Susan, their belief in her innocence, that she was a caring person, as she said, and she was not violent. There was no violence in Susan at all. That's really clear from if you know her and if you watch the telly programme that we've done. It's really clear when you see her interviews there. She's a very gentle spirit. So these 52 people after she had been convicted, so they're testifying to the fact that someone who has been convicted in court was not capable of doing what was said that she had done. And then after the second appeal in 2001, one of the MPs that we'd been involved with at that time was John McDonnell, and he facilitated and worked with us to petition across the whole House of Commons and the House of Lords for support for Susan against this miscarriage of justice. And around about just short of 100 MPs and people from the House of Lords signed up. They put their signatures to pieces of paper to confirm their belief that Susan's conviction was unsafe. This is the list of those people. That is the end of my report. I guess I should ask, if you're a common person, I should encourage you to write to the CCRC. Mr. Foster is the chairman of the CCRC. I should encourage you, if you think that this evidence shows that Susan's conviction is unsafe, can I encourage you to write to Mr. Foster and express that? We are anxious that the CCRC should soon finish their deliberations and refer Susan back to the Court of Appeal. Until they do that, we are also very anxious that they might just turn it down again. And so if that happens, against the background of what you've just seen, how will we ever make any progress? Thanks for watching. I appreciate that you've taken a long time to give to this presentation. Thank you.